Okay, welcome everybody to the July Linkerd online community meetup. We've got a great show for you today. Actually, some very exciting things to talk about. And we have, as always, a fun special guest to a member of the Linkerd community who's going to tell us about some work that they did to keep folks safe and maintain operations. I don't want to give away the category that they're in because they will do all of that for you. So pretty exciting. And then we're going to have one of the Linkerd maintainers tell us about what I think is just an amazing, and I mentioned this in the last meetup, the TapShark extension. So Alex will come and tell us why he wrote it and how you can use it. And then we'll talk, we'll announce our Linkerd hero for July, and then Q&A. As always, Q&A is open forum, but if you have an especially fun question that you want to ask to try and stump any of the maintainers that are here, we definitely encourage that. So without further ado, everything I just talked about is on the next slide. So news and updates, we can launch right into those. Oliver will tell us about the roadmap, and then yeah, special guests, stuff like that. So here we go. First, just a reminder about the Linkerd Community Anchor Program. This is for folks who are writing or who want to, members of the Linkerd community who are interested in sharing their experiences of using Linkerd in any environment. Production is great, of course, but if you're tinkering with something, or if you're integrating, what I find really interesting is folks who are doing integrations with other CNCF projects using Linkerd, and I think cobbling's the wrong term, but piecing together open source projects like Linkerd to build out their systems and ultimately reduce the amount of work that of code that they have to generate and write themselves. So, but that's just one aspect of this. When you are a Linkerd community anchor, you're generating content like this, writing blog posts. You can tell your story anywhere you want. We will help promote it through the Linkerd Twitter. And if you end up submitting, if you want to submit talks for conferences, we will help you refine your abstracts. Among the team, we've got years of experience at different conferences with different talks. So if you're interested, check us out on linkerd.io/community/anchor. If you have not participated yet, please do fill out the Linkerd 2021 survey. The URL there is a shortened URL, as you can see. The goal of this is to make Linkerd better. I think that we have a link to this on linkerd.io. Catherine, is that right?
And I'll put in a minute.
Great, thank you, thank you.
Give us your data. We need your data.
That's right. That's right. We won't sell it. Yeah, we won't sell it. We give it away for free. It's open source.
I don't think we could sell it. The only person who's interested in this is me or us.
That's true. That's true. So your data is safe with us.
Safe by virtue of it having no value to anyone else.
That's right. So yeah, please do fill that out. The link is in the chat box there in your browser. Moving on, news and updates. Some pretty exciting stuff. Most notably, in the last week, it's been announced, and in fact, yesterday it was announced that Linkerd graduated the CNCF through the CNCF process. There will be a special section dedicated to that, so that's all I'm going to say about it now. If you have questions about that, we can talk about those as well. So it's very exciting news. It makes all of us very happy, and yeah, we'll talk about it in a bit. The Linkerd team is continuing to roll out release edges every week, moving close to the 2.11 release. So if you are looking for a particular feature, you can try out any of the edges. Some of our more intrepid users are using edges in production, which I think is awesome. Other folks are taking a different approach and rolling out edges in their lower environments first in anticipation of 2.11. Some of the features that I can think of off the top of my head are, there are actually a ton of updates for dependencies, which I think is, it always makes the project healthy. There are also changes to the control plane. We continue to flatten the control plane, make it much more lean, and continue to build out the extensions for the new Linkerd SMI extension, I believe, is available, which was another piece of news that I was going to tell you about. And there are some new metrics. So we've separated, and this is like just the things that I can think of off the top of my head. There's much more. There are new metrics that are specifically for TCP and HTTP. They're in 2.10 and prior, there was, I think, a requests errors metric, and now that's been broken out into HTTP request success, HTTP request failures, and also TCP versions of those same two metrics. So much more granular, and for folks who are doing things like alerting or who want that low level of metrics, they can get that, and then you can take those and roll them up into, back up into that request level metric if you want. So that's one of the features that's in the current edges. Some interesting news, there's a team at CloudCover which reports that they have pushed 2.5 million requests per second through Linkerd. The caveat there is that the service at the end was just returning 200s, so it wasn't doing any actual work, but just the fact that they spent the time to get it to that level, it's pretty impressive, and we'll continue to be following them to see what they do when they have services that are actually performing logic and doing something more than just sending a 200 request back.
Charles, I think in this day and age, we can all give our services a little more slack. You know, sometimes returning 200 is the most we can expect of anyone here.
That's yeah, you're right. I mean, they could return 204s and return nothing. No content.
That's right, yeah.
But so I mentioned the metrics, we've added Dependabot to all of the repositories, I believe. So again, those updates are going through for the dependencies, which is awesome. And the final piece of news that I have, and of course, if there are other things that I've missed, please jump in, Catherine, William, Oliver, or anybody. We're going to do more stuff with the community. This once a month thing is great. We want to spend more time with you. So Catherine and I put together a plan to do office hours. And the first one of those will be August 12th. I will be streaming on Twitch that day. And for topics, I would love your input. So please tweet at Linkerd or to me at Charprex, and we'll put that into Slack. And I will also tweet it out so that you all can give us your thoughts on what we should be doing for those office hours, things that you're interested in. Okay, great. Oh, well, what I do want to say is that this is inspired by, if you haven't seen it yet, Matei did such an amazing presentation through the CNCF on his Twitch stream. I watched that, and it really got me inspired. Catherine mentioned it, and I said, hey, why don't we do something like that more regularly? So all the credit goes to Matei, and hopefully we can have the same, I can create the same level of useful and meaningful content that he did. So great job there. Okay, let's move on to the roadmap, and I will pass it over to Oliver. And you're muted.
Oh, well, that's not surprising. I'm not caffeinated yet, so I'm a little sluggish this morning. Sorry for that. Let's see. Yeah, so we're still working on 2.11. we did pause some of the policy work for a few weeks to dig into some of the feedback we were getting around identity management, and specifically how trust anchor rotation works, and starting with Argo and some of those things, Cert Manager. The culmination of that work for now is that we're in 2.11 going to move trust anchor configuration into its own config map. So this can be provided by external sources, not part of the default install. So you don't have to have necessarily the Helm chart provide that. I think there's still a little bit of work to get that integrated properly with Cert Manager. But we've learned a bit about Cert Manager, and there's some parts of their security model in terms of publishing certificates that's a little surprising and frankly underwhelming. But there are some issues that we're working, we've commented on, and hope to get some traction on their project to make that better. As I think was alluded earlier, and maybe later, we're adding an SMI extension. So Tarun's done a bunch of work to start to take the SMI CRDs out of the core Linkerd install. There's now an optional adapter that will read traffic split resources and generate Linkerd specific resources to configure those things. That's partly set up for policy, so that we can take a similar approach for traffic policy later, potentially. Matei's been working on stateful sets support for multi-cluster. That's very close to merging, if not this week's Edge, definitely next week's Edge. But that was a frequent request we've got around. Stateful sets are different than other services, where you don't want to load balance requests over stateful sets. You want to target specific pods, and to do that, we've had to really make a bunch of changes across the whole stack, from the proxy to the admission controller, to the multi-cluster service mirror to the destination controller. All of those have had to change to pick that up, and and the controller changes are about to merge in the next day or two, hopefully. If they haven't merged yet, maybe they have. And other than that, the policy work is kind of in full swing. We've got CRD PR up in the Linkerd 2 repo. We've got a new controller PR up in that repo. This is our first controller written in Go. Or sorry, pre-K. It's our first controller written in Rust, which is exciting. So we're starting to expand Rust usage out of the proxy into other parts of the project, which I'm really excited about, and I think most of the team is pretty excited about. And I'm starting to push forward proxy work, and there's basically 2 threads of proxy work going on right now. One is changing the inbound proxy to take its port configuration differently, so that we can start to do discovery from this controller for each port to get its policy and get updates about that policy as it runs. We've got this kind of mocked out outside the proxy, and it works pretty well, but getting that into the proxy is the next step. And also, the folks at NetApp have been helping us add FIPS 140-2 support to the proxy, which is basically, I don't want to say weakening the security, but using kind of more formal government standard security mechanisms. So we can't use Rust TLS Russells. We can't use ECDSA keys. We have to use RSA keys. We have to use OpenSSL or boring SSL. And so in my opinion, it's kind of going backwards from a bunch of decisions we made, but this is necessary to run in government, US government situations. So we're enabling that. It won't be enabled by default, but it will be a compile time option at the start for folks who care about that to opt into it. And so both those things are ongoing, and I hope to have some concrete progress on that hopefully some demos by the next time we're doing this meeting.
So folks will still be able to use the default Linkerd security proxy.
Yeah, I mean, we're not even going to compile that stuff in by default, but
okay.
be an option for kind of an alternate packaging of Linkerd.
Yeah, I feel like everyone who's in that situation is familiar with the idea of trading off security for more compliance. You know, it's like how these regulatory environments work.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Great. Well, thanks for the update on the roadmap.
Charles, I have another question.
I know. Oh yeah.
Sorry, is my internet all screwed up? Or am I okay?
I'm hearing you okay. Yeah.
The Rust in the control plane, is that going to be like easier Rust than the proxy Rust? I ask because people have asked me in the past, you know, how do I get involved? I really like Rust. How do I get involved with Linkerd? And usually my answer is, well, Linkerd Rust is like really hard Rust, so work on something easier first. But that's mostly about the proxy. Is the control plane any different?
Easy Rust versus hard. It's not really Rust is the problem there, right? It's that the complexity of the applications different. I think it's probably easier than the proxy to some degree, but also the proxies depends on the types of changes you're making, right? The proxy is actually pretty easy to make certain types of changes. For instance, Matei, as he was doing his multi-cluster stuff, had a fairly small change, and he has not written a lot of Rust before or written any proxy code before, and it took him a couple days to make that change without a lot of overhead. So like, I think maybe we overestimate how hard it is to make proxy changes. Other proxy changes, like the ones that I'm doing now for changing how policy works, require refactors, and then those are a bit more complex. And so those are going to be harder changes. So I think it's more about the changes you're making than the code base. That's the controller is kind of complicated because it's doing a bunch of indexing across like 5 different resource types, and that would be complex Go code, right? So making changes to that indexing is going to be hard, whether it's Go or Rust, because it's just like complicated multi like data race thing that you have to manage. Adding changes, for instance, I think we don't have an issue yet, but we will, to add validating mission control to the proxy or to the controller. That's going to be a relatively easy change because it's isolated and doesn't touch indexing or any of that stuff. So that's not yes and no. Like I think parts of that code base are pretty annoying, and that's just because it's the nature of what we're doing in that code base, which would be just as awful in Go, or probably worse in Go.
Yeah, okay. And then do you think the existing Go components are going to eventually be replaced by Rust components, or is that just going to be for new things, or TBD?
Depends how angry they make us. They don't make us too angry day to day right now, but I think if we got to a place where we're finding kind of a repeated category of bugs that were preventable, we'd be a little bit more inclined to rewrite. For now, though, like the destination controller works, we're not going to change it. A bunch of those things work, and we're not going to change them. But I think it's going to be anger driven more than anything else.
And we're not running into like performance issues with Go or whatever at this point.
Yeah, I mean, like we're doing some like really naive caching because client Go is just like, I'm going to cache all of these Kubernetes resources, like all like the full YAML of the thing. So we're like, the destination controller basically has to duplicate the memory footprint of the Kubernetes API server because it's storing all of those resources in memory because of the way it's doing caching. We could, if the memory pressure on those things gets bad, we could either rewrite caching manually in Go, or we could have a kind of narrower rewrite in Rust. But yeah, we're not dealing with like CPU usage things too much there. And client Go is like naive, but it's fine. Like most, I think the largest destination controller we've seen is like a couple gigs, which if you got a cluster that big, a couple gigs isn't really gonna hurt you.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
I just like the concept of anger-driven development. This is a new one to me.
Everything I do.
Okay. Well, since the two of you are chatting, we'll move on to the next big step or next topic, which is Linkerd graduation. And so please tell us all, how's it feel? What are you doing? Where are you going now?
Yeah, so it's a good time to announce we're shutting down the project. Now that we've graduated, no more reason to continue. Yeah, see you all later. No, I'm sure Oliver has a lot to add here. I've been doing a lot of talking to like reporters and stuff about this, so I'll tell you the same thing I've been telling them, which is I think this is it's a reflection of how far Linkerd has come, and I think it's pretty amazing. I think especially for a project like Linkerd, which has grown by word of mouth and has grown by having a really consistent vision and message of simplicity, and has been in this really competitive environment with other projects that are backed by these trillion-dollar companies. For Linkerd to grow in that environment and to get to the kind of the highest level of the CNCF, in my mind, is pretty remarkable. That said, I think this, in my opinion, graduation is kind of a moment maybe for us to feel some gratitude and to reflect on how far the project has come, but it's not a stopping point by any means. There's a whole long roadmap of super exciting features ahead of us, a whole long roadmap of super exciting problems that I want to solve with Linkerd ahead of us. So beyond this moment of like, okay, gratitude and reflection, I think we're still moving full speed ahead.
Yeah, from my side, I don't think it really impacts the engineering team at all. I mean, maybe we get invited to cooler parties at KubeCon now. I don't know how that works. But what I think is really great about graduation, I mean, is really everyone who's bet on Linkerd and had to like justify to their management of why they're not using the Google thing. That's probably been an awkward conversation in a couple companies at least. And so the graduation is kind of like the mark of approval from the Linux Foundation to be like, hey, this is a real thing. This was a good decision. And so I hope it makes a bunch of, people using Linkerd, I hope it makes their lives a little easier, especially as they go to management or their team or ask for headcount or whatever they're doing there. So yeah, good decision, everybody who used Linkerd. It's like clearly.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Like for folks like Dom and Brendan and others on the call, I know that you introducing Linkerd into your environment probably was like a somewhat risky move, right? You probably had a bunch of pushback from people who are like, well, I read about Istio and like Service Mesh magazine or whatever. That. And I have a lot of empathy for being in that situation. I think that was the right, obviously I believe that was the right choice, but I know it probably wasn't easy. So I really appreciate you doing that. And hopefully graduation, makes you feel good about your choice as well.
Yeah, I think those are both good points. As I reflected on it, I remember the first time that I poked at Linkerd 1 was on a business trip in a hotel room, and I was like looking at Linkerd and getting it set up and getting it installed. Then fast forward to KubeCon in Austin. I remember Conduit being announced, and then shortly from then on, I was kind of all in on Service Mesh, and so that was into the Linkerd 2 days. So graduation for me gave time to pause and reflect on where Linkerd has come from and where it's gone to, and certainly I have much less experience than the two of you do with that. In addition to the people in the community who are using Linkerd, I am just astounded by the folks who have built Linkerd, just the team behind the scenes, the engineers who have worked both through the Scala code and through the Rust and Go code through Linkerd 1, Linkerd 2. I mean, it's incredible to see it grow, and I think this is also a nod to them as well. This graduation, all their hard work, all their effort proves that there was a problem to be solved, and you can do it in a simple, easy way. So that was what I thought about. Okay, so congratulations to the community, to everybody, Linkerd. Congratulations to the CNCF for having an awesome service mesh. Let's move on to our community convo. I'm going to invite Dom to unmute and have a chat with us. Dom,
Hey.
thank you for joining. Good to see you. This is the first time you and I have actually spoken in person. I'm a big fan of your KubeCon talk. Watched it a couple times. So welcome. Thanks for being part of the community.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So today we want to talk about your work, the work that you've done at Penn State. Got a few questions for you, and we'll just have a fun conversation. So you have been a systems administrator for 15 years. What is your favorite part of how system administration has evolved?
So you gave me some of these questions ahead of time, and I read that 15 years, and I was thoroughly annoyed with myself. This is my part-time job until I could afford to go to grad school, and here I am 15 years later. I'd like to talk about just like the progression of the job, right?
Yeah.
So for those of you who are old enough to know, I started working on ZVM, which is an IBM operating system hypervisor where we're virtualizing Linux. And now I'm an architect for things on Kubernetes. So things have changed a bit for me over the 15 years. And I got to tell you, I don't look back very often at the old ways of doing anything. I really enjoy the way things have changed and matured and advanced. I don't miss at all like SSHing into boxes or using, I can't even remember the name of the tool for Rex editing on ZVM config files for VMs. So I like where I am now, and I don't often look in the past as far as technology goes.
Gotcha. That's great. I don't know what the Rex editor is either. So
you're not missing anything.
Great. So before so talking about your video that you posted for your KubeCon talk, you are a systems administrator at Penn State, or actually cloud administrator at Penn State, and very quickly last year you all shifted from what you were working on over to an application to process COVID test results and do contact tracing. So before we get into that, what were you what were you working on before then? Before you had this sudden switch?
Nothing really changed as far as what we were working on platform-wise. We were still Kubernetes. I believe we had Linkerd 2 up and running in production before the COVID system. We were writing applications for identity at Penn State. So like accounts.psu.edu, that's running on Kubernetes. And I think there were some, like maybe some student advising applications that were still running at the time. And they were our main big suite of work, right?
Gotcha.
I mean, for the past couple of years, I've been the DevOps architect for the software engineering department. So my duties are the things you mentioned, like cloud administration and Kubernetes administration, but it's also pipeline design and Kubernetes design and security liaison with our security department. So it's all the things. And so when we got the call to go to, we could talk about the more details here, but we got the call to build a contact tracing system. And it was a contact tracing and testing system. We had to pull in students and get them tested as they wanted to come back to the university, and randomized testing and all this kind of stuff. So we could dive right into the technical, what we chose to do that, to get it done fast, if you'd like.
I think what I heard though is you wear a bunch of hats and you were asked to pivot on a dime. So are you sure you're not working at a startup?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not just me, it was our entire software engineering team, right?
Yeah.
I'm just one of many there. But the university came to us and said, well, there's no way we could pay for anything to get this done fast. So let's get the software engineering team to do it. And we needed to move as fast as possible. So that's why we chose to use public cloud resources. We just use EKS as our building block. And AWS Postgres RDS and S3. Those are the three big building blocks of that system. But because it had never, at Penn State, had never been done before to have a HIPAA compliant system in Kubernetes, we immediately threw every security minded practice and tool at it that we could just to make people feel better. And Linkerd was originally there. It was because of the MTLS, right? We could tell our folks in the Office of Security, like, hey, this is all MTLS between all the services inside of the cluster, and everything coming into the cluster is TLS. So don't you feel warm and fuzzy on the inside? And they did. And now we're writing a new spec for Penn State security that it's required for secure systems to use Linkerd because of the MTLS. And the fact that you guys just graduated, that made them feel even warm and fuzzier.
That's great. That's awesome. Okay, and so it sounds to me like you used EKS. Now you have a hybrid mix of EKS and on-prem infrastructure. Was that intentional, or was that driven by the fast pace that you all had?
So all of the fast pace for the COVID system is in EKS.
Okay.
So all the EKS, all the services that are there are only for COVID.
Gotcha.
And then they are calling the identity system services on-prem in our on-prem Kubernetes cluster.
Gotcha.
And no, it's not Linkerd multi-cluster. It's just ingress to ingress.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Totally makes sense. Are you planning to do multi-cluster?
We're not sure if we're going to keep those EKS clusters around anymore.
Okay.
So we have intentions of doing multi-cluster for anything else, but not necessarily for this COVID system.
Gotcha. Okay. So speaking of the COVID system, you, in your talk, which again, I will link this in the chat. You talk about the system, how you rolled it out, and on a particular day, you tried to send 1,000 emails and something happened. What happened, and how did you get that notification? Like, what was your initial indication that something wasn't right?
So as far as I remember, and I didn't watch the presentation between talking back and forth with you and now, but the gist is our lead in the business side of the COVID system said, we need to send out tons of invites to get people tested before they show up in the fall. And we're going to send all these invites out on the same day, but we'll send them out in batches, right? So it wasn't like hit the button and wait for 120,000 invites to go out. But as we started batching out invites, we were the whole system, software engineering team was sitting around watching dashboards in Grafana and, watching up and down things with Nagios, things like systems like that. But we noticed every time a batch went out, things would get a little funky, not just in the COVID system, but on-prem with some of the identity software. We started seeing more 502s or long waits. But the lead on our side wanted to batch out more and more. So he'd, batch out 1,000 or whatever it was, and it'd be okay. Then he'd batch out 2,000, and he'd just keep increasing the batch until it basically stopped. And we knew it happened because we were watching the whole time. So it wasn't luckily one of those scenarios where like the nursing staff and the COVID tents were calling us and saying like, hey, nothing's working at all. But we knew nothing was working because we were watching it. We were fortunate in that case.
Gotcha. Okay, so it was the Grafana dashboards and just the vigilance that you had that gave you the indication that something was failing.
Yeah, because it was a big day already, so we knew to watch, right?
Gotcha. And so in the talk, you say that you found that the root cause was an unnecessary check from the COVID service to the identity service?
Yeah, there was a component in the identity system that was checking to make sure a user ID of a student existed in a backend database, but it was actually superfluous, right?
Okay.
We were checking Kerberos to see if the user existed with a very heavy check, like resource intensive check that wasn't necessary.
Gotcha.
So eventually what we did, the developer removed that check from the identity system, and then everything just opened up.
Awesome.
Throttle.
So you can protect the identity of the innocent or not so innocent. But can you share with us what happened to that engineer who wrote that code?
Oh, I love that question. I think you want me to say we took him out back, right? No, that never happened. We have this mantra where we work that it's like, I am Spartacus mantra. If somebody messes up, not only do we hide their identity, but we all say we messed up so they can't do anything about it. So no one got in trouble or anything like that. The person who knew how to fix it was basically the hero of the day.
Honestly, I wasn't hoping that you would say that you, actually the answer that you gave was the one that I was hoping you'd give. In our last talk, we had Saul Roberts on, and he was talking about failing in public, which you hear folks talk about this a lot. And I love the idea that a team as a whole would take responsibility for an error or an issue, a code issue. So I think it's fantastic. I did ask that question just kind of be kind of punchy and funny, but that is the best answer, honestly, and the fact that it's the truthful answer is so good. So I really appreciate it and appreciate your time. So if you could add any feature to Linkerd, what would it be? This is my last question for you for the day.
We're actually just in love with the roadmap. We're just waiting with patience actually for some of the features coming out, and I think it's 12 where we have a little bit of RBAC, service to service RBAC. But
we're doing everything right.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. Well, great. I know that other folks in the community are also eagerly anticipating it. And as the person who interacts with the team on a day-to-day basis, I see them working diligently at getting that out. So cool. We're excited to get it out as well. So yeah, really, really appreciate your time today, Dom. I think, again, I will put we'll put the link to your talk in the channel here, Slack channel, and we'll share it out as well. It's a great talk, very informative. In 30 minutes, you put in a ton of information about why you use Linkerd, and then the example of finding an error and solving an error in a matter of a day, I think is what it was. So that's great.
It all happened in an afternoon, essentially.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. Yeah, well, again, thank you so much. I've been talking way too much, I think, already, so I want to get caught up on time. So we're going to switch over to Alex, who's going to tell us about TapShark. There's Catherine just put the link into the talk to the link in, the link to the talk into the chat. So watch that immediately after the community meeting. Thanks again, Dom. Let's go over to you, Alex.
Hello. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I think I have to stop sharing so you can, are you going to share?
I am going to share, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing, and then I think you'll be able to share.
All right. So unfortunately, it doesn't give me a preview of what I'm about to share here, so I hope I picked the right
It's a surprise for everybody.
Yeah.
Close all the gaming websites.
Yeah.
That's right.
Here we go.
Too many tabs open, is that what you said?
Yeah, too many terminals.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right, so I wanted to give a little demo of a Linkerd extension I wrote called TapShark. And to give a bit of background, some people may be familiar with the Linkerd command tap. So if I run something like Linkerd viz tap on a deployment in my Kubernetes cluster, like the web deployment in the Emoji Voto service, let me bump up the font size a little bit. This gives me a whole bunch of data. It gives me kind of a running stream of information about requests, live requests that are happening in the system. So it lets me listen in on requests kind of as they happen. And this is one of my favorite Linkerd features because it lets you just instantly drill down to the request level and see all this like super detailed data about requests as they happen, which is really useful for debugging and kind of understanding the system. But what you can probably notice is that while there's a lot of information here, as a human, it's very difficult to kind of understand or parse that. It's like information overload. And so anytime I'm using TAP, it's always kind of a time-consuming process to look at this data and read it and figure out what I'm looking at and figure out where the relevant information is in here. And in fact, if you use flags like the O wide flag, you can get even more data, which is even more useful, but even more difficult to kind of understand and parse, especially at a glance. I wrote a little extension for Linkerd based on kind of the format of Wireshark, which is one of my favorite tools for doing network debugging, that makes it a little bit more readable and easier for a human to understand what's going on here. So if I do TapShark instead, I get the same data, but now in a ncurses type UI, like I said, inspired by Wireshark. So there's two panels here. There's kind of this top panel where I can browse requests in a tabular format. So you can see, this request here I have selected goes from the vote pod to the web pod, and I can see, the verb and the path and the status and the latency. And then I can hit enter there to populate the bottom tab, the bottom panel with all of that really rich, detailed information in kind of a more readable format. So there's all kinds of metadata about the request here and about the source and the destination. We can see things like the path, the authority. We can see all of the request headers and response headers and trailers. And it's just a much easier way to browse this data. You can kind of go through and look at different requests. Like, for example, I know this request here, which is to the vote donut path. You can look down here at the details, and you can see in the response trailers, in the response headers, that this was a gRPC failure. So you can see the gRPC status message and the gRPC status code in those headers. It's just a really fast way to kind of drill down to that individual request level data. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much all there is to it. This is a client-side only Linkerd extension, so there's nothing to deploy into Kubernetes. This all runs on the CLI, and it just uses the existing TAP API and TAP infrastructure, but reformats the output in a way that's easier to browse and easier to understand. So I've used this a ton when doing debugging, and it's been super, super helpful. It gets me the information I need a lot faster than it would if I were just trying to kind of parse the regular TAP output.
Yeah, that's super awesome. I think the first time I saw it, I was pretty blown away. In the past, we've had the debug side, or we still have the debug sidecar. How does this relate to that? Is it an addition? Does it take place of the debug sidecar? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, it's kind of a different layer of debugging, right? So this uses the TAP API, which you get automatically from having the Linkerd Viz extension installed. So it doesn't require the debug sidecar at all. The debug sidecar is useful if you kind of want to go even deeper than this and look at things like, the state of your sockets or, stuff like that, really low level stuff. But for kind of HTTP level debugging, this is my preferred tool.
Gotcha. That's awesome. Yeah, great work on this. It's very cool. I like the way it scrolls and you've got the separated windows there. I am not familiar with ncurses, so I'm going to go look that up. But it's very cool. So great work on that. Thank you for sharing it with us. Any other thoughts or comments before we move on?
I just wanted to ask, I kind of already know the answer to this, but is there support for viewing bodies?
Great question. Thanks, Dennis. There will be eventually. So TAP right now doesn't show request or response bodies, but that's a feature on the roadmap, and it's one I'm really excited for because it would fit so nicely into this UI. Just being able to see the actual contents of the message, incredibly useful. So
yeah,
it's
especially for. I was just going to say, especially for gRPC, where you have to decode bodies and all that stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Alex. I encourage you all to try out the Linkerd TapShark extension. You can install it the same way that we install other extensions, which Actually, we'll link the repo into the chat, and then y'all can check it out. So let me get back to the slides here, and we are about to announce your July hero, Linkerd Hero. So the hero selection process is nominated by the community, and this month your hero is Sanskar Jaishwal, and I apologize for my pronunciation of that. I hope it's okay. Thank you so much. He was nominated by other folks in the community, but Matei especially was the one who advocated for Sanskar, and he, I believe, made some significant code contributions. Is that right, Matei?
Yeah, I was trying to find my unmute button. Yeah, that's right. Sanskar actually had a few contributions all over the place in the Linkerd D2 repo, who I can't speak from all of the typing. So yeah, huge congratulations from me. Your work has been very, very appreciated from my side and from the rest of the team. And yeah, keep it going. We hope to see you contribute more. Really exciting.
Yeah, so thank you so much and congratulations. Yep. Prepare to be honored on the Linkerd.io website in perpetuity, forever and ever. So thanks again.
I like these fancy graphics with like the green glow from the Linkerd logo.
Yeah, I want a shirt with one of those
really getting
shields.
Fancy for these.
Super cool. Okay, and how can you nominate the Linkerd hero? We are for next month, and so we've got a short URL there. We're going to change that up so it's an easier URL for you to get to. Please nominate people you think in the community who are either making great code contributions. If you've been helped out by somebody in Linkerd Slack, please nominate them. If you found some useful content on the internet where somebody wrote something interesting about Linkerd, you can nominate them, and they will be in the running for next month's Linkerd Hero Award. Quick note there, the Buoyant team doesn't qualify, which makes me a little bit sad, but that's okay. We get to work with Linkerd every day, so that in and of itself is reward.
We're the Linkerd villains.
That's right. Okay, and with that, we're coming up on the end. We've got a few minutes for Q&A/Stump the Maintainer. So if you've got a question, I think a group here who can ask you to unmute yourself, or you can type a question here in Slack if that's more comfortable for you, or Slack in the chat if that's more comfortable for you. Any questions for anybody? I'll throw a question out to Oliver about policy. There was a question in Linkerd Slack that came in yesterday about how our policy will interact, if at all, with Kubernetes network policies. Are they going to be totally separate, or will we be able to read network policy resources?
They're not. We're not going to read network policies. I guess it would be possible to write an adapter that reads network policies and generates Linkerd policies, but they're not an exact match. I guess they're similar, but not different. It's probably worth going through the policy design doc if you have questions on this. There's a repo in the Linkerd org or in the Linkerd org that has kind of the thought process here, but our real goals are to be able to enforce MTLS. Like that's the fundamental thing we want to start with, and there's lots that we can do after this. But the starting place is I'm a service. I listen on these ports. On these ports, I require TLS from these clients, or I require these specific client identities. And so we really just want to build into Linkerd's authentication system, which is MTLS-based authentication, to set who can talk to whom, right? We also need to have the kind of support to say, well, this port is a health check. Like we have to, well, first of all, we have to allow unauthenticated communication in some cases. So there's ways to do that. And we also have to permit connections from kubelet, because kubelet's responsible for doing health checking, and we don't want to have to field endless amounts of support queries around how to get my pods to start, because kubelet can't do health checking. So it's not really an exact match with network policy, though we did look pretty closely at how network policies are configured when we were doing this, because they do kind of fit a similar, but not exactly the same place.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you for reminding me about the design doc. I think that's something that I can share with the person who asked that question in Slack. So that's very helpful. Thanks a lot. Any other questions from the community to the community? Going once, going twice. Catherine, did I forget anything?
I think so.
Okay. Well, then I think we can call that a meeting. Thanks everybody for joining. Hopefully we'll see you in a couple weeks, August 12th. I'll make some noise on it on the Twitters leading up to August 12th for that office hours. And again, mostly looking for your feedback on what you would like to talk about. And again, don't forget to submit your nominations for Linkerd Heroes for next month. And look forward to seeing you in all of our channels, whether it's Twitter, Slack, Discord. Come join us, say hi, ask us questions, and yeah, thanks for being part of the community. Bye for now.
Goodbye.